Well, new legislative maps approved by the Virginia Supreme Court in December change how Central Virginia is represented in Richmond and in Washington.
That's right. In the first of a two-part series, CBS 19's Kathryn Young starts at the state level. She explains how Virginia got to these new legislative maps and how they impact our elected officials.
The redistricting process this year was different than in years past. The new legislative maps were created by two special masters appointed by the Virginia Supreme Court. A bipartisan commission was adopted in 2020 through a constitutional amendment passed by voters and created a new redistricting process. When the original process failed to meet deadlines, it moved to the courts, where the new maps were finally approved.
I think maybe one of the first things you would notice if you were looking at these maps, the lines are a lot less jagged. The districts are generally more compact.
Locally, Charlottesville and the innermost parts of Albemarle County are in the 54th House of Delegates district. It's largely unchanged from the previous 57th district, represented by Delegate Sally Hudson. It's basically the same district with a new name.
Well, I think Virginia voters got what they wanted. For the first time in Virginia history, we have maps that are drawn based on where the people live and not the sitting politicians.
Hudson says she's happy with how condensed the districts are compared to prior legislative maps. She says it allows constituents to more effectively make changes.
If voters can't hold their elected officials accountable, that's when government runs off the rails. When you've got these crazy districts that are stretched out all over, the people who live in them don't even know that they're neighbors. They have no idea that they all belong to the same district. And so it makes it much harder for them when there is something going on for them to band together and change it.
In the case of Senator Creed Deeds, his district changed quite a bit. The Democrat now lives in the same district as two incumbent Republicans in a district that usually votes for Republicans. Deeds says the voters now get to pick their elected officials instead of elected officials creating districts for themselves.
I've always thought there's a conflict of interest built into a process when legislators get to decide what their districts look like.
So he says he's moving to an area where many of the people he represents already live, the new 11th Senate District.
I'm looking for something right now to get in Charlottesville. And I would anticipate that within the next few weeks or certainly the next few months, I will be moving to Charlottesville. I'm not done serving. I still think I've got things to say and things to do. My choice is to run the area that where the majority of my constituents, my present constituents are, and that's Charlottesville, Albemarle, and Nelson counties.
Both Sally Hudson and Creed Deeds agree that legislators have no part in creating their districts.
I think you need politicians out of the process entirely.
I think redistricting ought to be in the hands of an independent commission.
Delegate Rob Bell declined to speak for the story, and we didn't hear back from Delegate John McGuire. For CBS 19 News, I'm Kathryn Young.
New legislative maps approved by the Virginia Supreme Court in December change how Central Virginia is represented in Richmond and in Washington.
In the second part of a two-part series, CBS 19's Kathryn Young tells us how these new maps will impact local voters when it's time to pick members of Congress.
Virginia will still send 11 representatives to Washington, but which counties those people will represent has changed quite a bit. J. Miles Coleman from the UVA Center for Politics said the special masters did a good job of drawing the lines.
Joe Biden carried the state by a little over 10 points. He carried 7 of the 11 congressional seats on the new map.
And Governor Glenn Youngkin, who narrowly won the governor's race, would have carried 6 of the 11 new congressional districts. Abigail Spanberger is running for re-election in the 7th district, which no longer includes her home county of Henrico.
So the redistricting process really changed the configuration of the 7th congressional district. We went from being a north to south configuration of multiple counties, from Culpeper to Nottoway, to being a west to east district. Begin in the Culpeper orange, we've added Madison, we've added Greene, and a small portion of Albemarle County. And then we stretch west all the way over to King George County and Caroline County.
We spoke to Spanberger about the changes, and she said it was a long journey to get here.
I think the process was very different from anything that we've witnessed here in Virginia before, because we had the commission failed, which I think was a disappointment for many people, even just to see that process didn't work out.
But Coleman says there was a method to the way the lines were drawn.
I think the fastest growing part of Virginia is that corridor by Prince William, Fredericksburg, Stafford. So it wasn't too surprising that they would basically draw a congressional district to give that area a bit more of its own individual representation.
The UVA Center for Politics rates the 7th District as leans Democratic, a big change from the last decade. 5th District Representative Bob Good's district looks a bit different as well. It's shorter and wider than it was before.
Well, the Supreme Court, I think, on the whole, did a good job because the districts are more compact. They make more sense geographically, which is in the best interest of the constituents and the voters, and they should be primary.
Bob Good is running for re-election and says the new lines will make representatives easier to access.
It's in their best interest if they're more accessible to their Congress member, and the Congress member can be more accessible to them.
Sabato's crystal ball rates the 5th District as safe Republican.
Despite the presence of Charlottesville, it's a hard seat for Democrats.
Voters will choose representatives in these new congressional seats this November. For CBS 19 News, I'm Kathryn Young.
These will be the boundary lines for the Commonwealth until after the next census, which is in about 10 years.